Ready? Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. Time and place for our informational meeting from Montana Dakota Utilities. We appreciate these periodic updates from MDU. We have Commissioner Kimochi and Commissioner O'Donnell and myself participating today. And with that said, I'll turn it over to MDU. Wonders of technology. I would just remind folks that are listening online to mute yourself.
Oh, really?
I think we are muted. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, commissioners. Thanks for the opportunity to present. It's good to be back in person and to be in the hearing room with you. And my name is Travis Jacobson, and I am the Director of Regulatory Affairs for Montana Dakota, and came out of Bismarck today. I've got a whole host of characters with me today, and I'm going to let them just introduce themselves as they come up, and we'll just go ahead and get started. So just the agenda, and I think everybody has slides. We've got cookies up here too that we brought. If anybody's interested, feel free to grab. And again, appreciate everybody coming today. So I'll just do a brief introduction, and I've got Sean Newsma with me here, who will talk about the upcoming heating season, the winter heating season. We've got Joe that's going to talk about some generation updates that we've got going on here. And Darcy is going to talk about some MISO long-range planning. And then we've got Dyke Bay's cybersecurity. It's been a topic that makes a lot of headlines when things don't go right. And we've got a very robust cyber team that Dyke is a part of. And finally, I'll wrap it up then with some information about a rate case that we have planned for late in the fourth quarter of 22. And just for some general information, we thought we'd throw in a slide. Montana Dakota, along with Cascade, Intermountain, and Great Plains, make up what we term as our MDU utilities group. We have about 1.2 million electric and natural gas customers in 461 communities across 8 states. We have 144,000 electric customers, which we have in Montana as well. And we have about 735 megawatts of owned generation. And then we have about 1 million natural gas customers as well. Montana Dakota is part of MDU Resources Group, and we're subsidiaries of that organization. Diving in a little bit to Montana specific. In Montana, we serve 54 different communities, and we have 86,000 natural gas customers and about 26,000 electric customers, primarily on the eastern side of the state. We have 151 full and part-time employees that live and work in the state of Montana, and that would be for both our gas and our electric operations. We have generation facilities in Miles City. We have a combustion turbine there. We have 2 combustion turbines near Glendive, Montana. And then Diamond Willow is down in the Baker area. And then finally, Lewis and Clark, we have the reciprocating internal combustion engines that are sited in the Sydney area. And that's a picture of the Diamond Willow wind farm near Baker.
States here have a red dot indicating like that's the Miles City. There's 4 dots, the one that's
So that would be Miles City.
oh, I'm sorry.
Pardon me. Do you see what I'm looking at?
I think that would be the Miles City turbine.
Oh, it seems to be, okay. And what are the other three?
So there would be Sydney would be the north one. And then you've got Glendive would be, I'll say the one in the middle.
Okay,
And then the wind farm would be the other one. That would be Diamond Willow by Baker.
okay, thank you. Excuse me for the interruption.
Oh, and just speaking of that, if you guys have questions as we're going through, just feel free to ask them right away. And I think it makes it more informative for you and you can get your questions right up front. So,
Thank you.
and with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sean.
Thank you, Travis. My name is Sean Nusma. I am the gas supply manager with Montana Dakota Utilities. The purpose of my presentation today is to lay out the reasons for why we are nationally expecting some higher than normal natural gas costs. I want to give you guys the opportunity to ask any questions you may have specific to the higher costs. And as Travis mentioned, please feel free to jump in during the presentation. And I'd also like to give a brief overview of how Montana Dakota is working to mitigate the costs that our customers in the 4 states that we serve against those higher natural gas costs. Just looking at the national natural gas pricing history and what we're expecting for the forecast. The blue line highlighted in the graph is what the historic inside FERC settlement price at Henry Hub has been dating back to January of 2016. As you look at that, it's traded in a range from just below $2 per MMBTU to approaching $5 at certain times. Going into this heating season, which is where we're transitioning from the blue line to the red line, you do see that we are at the Henry Hub index expected to be in that $6 range for the foreseeable 5 or 6 months. What are some of the drivers of the higher natural gas pricing? First and foremost, the post-pandemic demand returning faster than production. And I'll specifically talk about residential, commercial, and industrial. Also take a look at some exports and LNG exports in particular. National storage is of concern. And then some concerns about the winter weather outlook. And then I plan to touch on just some general uncertainties in the market. So starting with the return of demand, and this slide is titled as return of demand for residential, commercial, and industrial. During the pandemic, you could say return of demand. You could also say that demand didn't slough off as much as maybe the news or industry experts anticipated. As you see, the curve going from summer to winter seemed to rise and fall this past winter, the same as it had the previous couple. And the dips in residential, commercial in demand, which would be the bottom of your blue line there, stayed relatively flat to the past few years. The same can be said for industrial with the orange line, where it was generally flat going back all the way to, in this graph, January of 2019. So return of demand. So as I look at power and exports, the first line, which is your gray line on the top, that is the last 3 years of power generation burn of natural gas throughout the U.S. You'll see it'll ebb and flow as the seasons change, peaking out in the summer months and then dipping down again in the winter months. That is shown to be fairly consistent with some moderate growth. But the two most important lines on this graph are your orange line, which is the sum of our national LNG export for feed gas, as well as the blue line, which is our sum of exports to Mexico. And so you can see, as highlighted in these graphs, we have seen an increase of our demand in those particular areas.
Excuse me, are you talking about your company or nationally?
Nope, this is nationally.
Right,
So
I
at this,
thought so.
at
Yeah.
this point, I'm going to focus on the national,
Yeah.
and then we'll get into some Montana, Dakota specific items. So if we take a deeper dive onto our exports, I'll point out that these particular graphs are specific to the Asian market. However, it should be noted that Europe is seeing a very similar trend. So the graph on the left shows the 12 months of LNG exports, and the gray shaded area would be your 5-year range. Your dark blue would be the 2020 exports month over month. And it's important to note the lighter blue line, and that is what we've experienced year to date on LNG exports leaving from the various hubs throughout the United States. The graph on the right, it's kind of messy, but I think it very clearly points out the rise and sudden rise in LNG export value on a per MMBTU basis. Particularly taking off toward the end of the first quarter of 2021. In contrast to the increasing demand, nationally, we've really seen a lag in production. If this graph looks really boring to you, it's really because it is. National production has really stayed stagnant over the past several years, and this graph shows from 2019 on. There's only two real noticeable changes that I would point out on this graph. The first one being, you can see there is some production slide going from February of 2020 into the summer of 2020. Obviously, that has a lot to do with some of the pandemic-related drilling activity slowing down. The other dip that you will see in the February of 2021, that's largely related to Winter Storm Uri, which caused a lot of production issues, particularly in the states of Texas and Oklahoma, which has been well documented as far as taking a lot of production offline. But generally speaking, both our gross production and imports have stayed very stagnant. This graph helps to highlight that a little bit more. And so what it does, the graph on the left we're looking at is what has been the change in net production dating back to 2007. And you see the large rise going from 07 to all the way up into the 2017. And then you see another increase in production in the various shale plays all the way through about 2019. And then what you'll notice in 2019 is we've really stayed at a flat to even at certain times declining level of production nationally. To help support this, the graph on the right is showing the weekly total rig count.
Before you leave that one,
sure.
Where is MDU on there? Are you receiving gas from any of those particular major sources?
Yeah, absolutely. So our two biggest areas that we're going to take gas out of is what's shaded in yellow. That would be the Bakken. So between Montana Bakken and North Dakota Bakken. Mm-hmm. And then what we refer to as the Rockies. And to be honest, I'm not sure if it comes into the rest of U.S. shale play on this particular graph as cited by the EIA. But that would be you've got the Niobrara portion in there in that lightly shaded green area. So those are our two biggest plays from which we are buying natural gas production.
Thank you.
Sure.
I have a question.
Are we seeing a drop in production based on who's president? For instance, drilling's been cut back because of President Biden, which then limits our supply of new natural gas. Would you say that's a factor?
I'd say it's a consideration, but I'd say that the facts that we know is that most of the natural gas and oil producing companies throughout the United States, they went into calendar year or fiscal year 2021 discussing their commitment to maintaining capital discipline throughout as we come out of the pandemic. In other words, they didn't want to commit to spending extra capital on exploration and production. That's been a real big driver of keeping production stagnant for this calendar year. The real question is giving an $80 per barrel crude price and these higher natural gas prices. The real question is, are these same companies going into fiscal year 2022 really going to turn that around? Are they going to start putting some more capital investment into increasing in their drilling? And that's one of the things we're really looking out for and to see what's going to happen with prices.
As we're seeing coal being shut down and we're going to increase electric production with natural gas, this has to have an effect on the price of natural gas.
Absolutely. So, and as we had in the previous slide, we're seeing that demand slowly come up over time. Absolutely.
So my ratepayer is concerned that we should be back to coal, which I understand is a tremendous problem, especially with this president. But if we're going to put in more gas turbines and the price of natural gas goes up, you're going to come here and ask for a rate increase because the price of natural gas went up. And that is be a rate increase to the electric customers. But then in turn, you'll turn around and say we have to raise the rates of natural gas to heat homes. And the ratepayer is saying, why would we go in the direction of generating more electricity with natural gas in a volatile natural gas market? What do I tell them? How would you like me to explain that to them?
Commissioner Pinochi, Darcy is going to be up later. And he deals a lot with MISO, which is where we get our power. And I think that would probably fit better in his conversation. So we could just table that till Darcy.
Sure, you remind me.
I will do that.
Then this may not be a question for you. I have two counties with no natural gas at all, Sheridan and Daniels County. Is there any plans to deliver natural gas to two counties that have never seen it in the history of Montana? And I've talked to the legislation about when they come up with ideas for infrastructure money, if I could get infrastructure money delivered to you, would you then put a gas line into those two counties? And perhaps it's not feasible because there's just not enough people living there. What would you like me to tell Sheridan and Daniels County when they reach out to me and say, look, Pinochi, this is your district. And as a retired person, I hate filling propane bottles. What can I tell them? Is this the right guy to ask, or do you have another person I should bring that up to?
I think Sean and I can tag team on this one. So we have looked at communities that we can serve. For instance, in North Dakota, we ran a gas line to Gwinner, North Dakota.
Hey, Travis, this is Mike. Can you make sure your mic is turned on?
Yep.
The
The light is
I can
on.
see it from here.
But we have run, can you hear me now, Mike?
Yeah, that's better. Thank you.
I think I was just too far away. So we do look at those opportunities. And like I say, in Milner, they had a large anchor that made it feasible. The Bobcat manufacturing, I'm sure you've heard of Bobcat before. So they were using propane and we were able to run natural gas to them. So that was a big part of doing that. So economics wise, it does take a fairly large customer base so that we can run, the line there. Now, if there's infrastructure money that we would able to leverage, we certainly would look at any and all communities and see if we can do that. In Dayton and Ranchester and Wyoming, a company, they ran a line to them as well. So there is opportunity if, again, it's ultimately has to be economic, and it does take a fairly large load to make that economic. And you can add to that.
If infrastructure money was available, and I'll lean on the legislators who are saying, hey, look, we don't have natural gas in these counties. It would be proper for me to have them work directly with you to come up with some ideas of the amount of money we'd need in the next infrastructure bill. I'm hoping to meet with the governor tomorrow and tell him that I'm going to be trying to generate some excitement having representatives in these districts come visit us here at the commission. And before we leave today, maybe contact that I can have them reach out to you. Because I think it's time these counties that don't have natural gas can get it. It's very frustrating when they look just a few miles away and see the oil wells just venting off gas and burning it when they have no natural gas to use at all. And then you're telling me the prices are going to go up while we're going to increase the amount of electricity generated with natural gas, which I think is going to make the problem worse. And when we start seeing a lesser amount of natural gas, while we're doubling the amount used to generate electricity, Montanans could be looking at huge increases. And they're very concerned about that. So, all right, thank you.
So yeah, and a couple things we consider when we're looking at incremental communities such as Travis described. You know, the biggest thing that we look at, and this does come through our department, is proximity to natural gas transmission lines, and where we could take natural gas off of before we can run extensions. So that is the biggest thing. If they're in an area that has natural gas transmission through the area, that's, you know, the biggest cost as far as getting the biggest initial cost of getting gas to those locations. And then obviously, as Travis mentioned, having the right amount of load to make it economically feasible is our things we consider. But absolutely, we can get you some names and contacts and further that conversation if it's appropriate. So yeah, this next slide, it really ties the whole supply and demand together. The blue line is basically the sum of the production that the United States has seen over the past almost 3 years. And the red line represents the demand that the United States has used over the last 3 years. And really, if you look at those peaks in demand on a monthly basis, those really are weather dependent. And so if we have a cold winter, obviously those will be higher. If we have a warmer winter, those will be lower. The really telling piece of this graph, however, is the trough of the red line. And that's really where things like power production come into play. And you see year over year, and I drew the blue arrow in there to represent kind of where we were during the year of 2020, which looks very similar to 2019 over the summer months. And then over this most recent summer that just ended, and you can see how that trough over the last year is much higher. Now that's partly due to a very warm winter, or excuse me, a very warm summer that the United States faced. So there was elevated power burn throughout the U.S., but it's kind of expected that that trend may continue as we just discussed. And, you know, when supply is failing to keep up with demand, the other thing we consider and look at very closely is our storage deficiency. This graph is a little challenging to read, but the gray highlighted again represents the 5-year average on a month-over-month basis. And the blue line on the top there, that represents where we are today. So you see as we enter the 2021-2022 heating season, that blue line is really at below the normal range. Effective October 15th, we were 11.7% below last year's average, and we're 4.2% below the 5-year average. I do think it's important to note, however, we have been catching up on those statistics over the last couple of weeks. We've had a relatively mild end of October nationally, so those numbers have changed slightly in the last couple of weeks. So moving in the positive direction. I'll also point out, I mentioned LNG exports. I just threw this little bullet in here for European storage. And effective the 18th, Europe's storage was 77% full, compared to 95% full last year and 91% full on the 5-year average. So again, that goes to support that there is a need for and a desire to have the United States as natural gas.
So where does MDU store gas? In depleted gas fields?
Yep, we have 2 primary natural gas fields. One is located south of Billings, referred to as Elk Baker. The other is the Baker Storage Field, which is near Baker, Montana. Both Bakers are very large from a physical perspective, can hold a lot of gas. And the Elk Basin field is also large, but it's very capable. It can really withdraw and inject a lot of gas on a given day. So very capable field at Elk Basin as well.
Thank you.
The next slide, and my joke is this slide is over an hour old, so it's already out of date. The real message that I'm going to leave you with today is that there's really not a lot of consensus among weather forecasters on what this winter is going to look like. One day it'll be warmer than normal, the next day it'll be colder than normal. So really what MDU plans for is what's normal and just creates the ability to pivot as if it's warmer or colder. As of the time I pulled this graph, basically we're at equal chances of having a La Nina versus an El Nino. And then from a precipitation perspective, it was really equal chances. You see a lot of white in North Dakota and Montana and South Dakota, a little bit of green on the precipitation, but that could really go either way, I guess, is the message I'll leave you with. So kind of to wrap things up is on why we're having higher natural gas outlooks is there's really just a lot of uncertainty in the market. Uncertainty leads to volatility, and then you pay a higher risk premium to marketers who are marketing that gas and ultimately higher prices. So a lot of the questions that we're asking, nationally is how high will post-pandemic demand reach? Still uncertain. When does production catch up to demand? Like we talked about, our producers going to start investing in oil and gas exploration and production. We're going to have enough gas stored for the winter nationally. What's our temperature going to look like? And then there's always the question in the back of everyone's mind after last February's winter weather event is, are we going to see another winter weather event like that again this year? And making sure we're planning for that.
So let me ask this. Can we go back to that slide? An uncertainty in the natural gas market would have to have a line that says we're generating a lot more electricity and we will be in the future. Are they trying to hide that? Why wouldn't that be in this paragraph?
On the natural gas generation?
That's got to be an uncertainty.
Absolutely.
Why isn't it there? It's like, are they trying to hide that fact? Because the ratepayer is really concerned if we're putting in more and more gas turbines to generate electricity, this is going to cause the price of natural gas to go up. While they're very well educated to know that the price of coal stays pretty flatline. But it's not here to show that this is going to be a huge factor. At least I believe it's a huge factor. Has someone put a pencil to it and said, the huge uncertainty is if we're going to start generating a tremendous amount of more electricity with natural gas, why wouldn't that be here? What do I tell them?
Yeah, and we really file that under the category of how high will this post-pandemic demand get over the next few years, how much generation is going to come online. Will the price of natural gas be prohibitive to that? And we really don't know where that's going to come.
Well, I think it should be added here. Did someone bring that up or wasn't on the list of things to put?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, and it's again, it's part of that. How high will demand get? It falls into the demand category, the way I consider that.
All right.
So looking at how Montana Dakota is positioned to keep ourselves and keep our customers mitigated from the higher expected cost. Going back to that Henry Hub slide, over last year's natural gas prices at this time, we're expecting about a 253% increase to the index basis prices. Right now, our calculated customer cost impact to Montana Dakota utility customers for Montana is about 62%. So how have we positioned ourselves to help mitigate against that risk? A couple of items. We'll talk about storage. We're going to talk about fixed price, and then we're going to talk about the region from which we buy the majority of our natural gas and how we're positioned there. So there's 4 different types of supply deals that we have. The first one is inside FERC exposure, and what that is, inside FERC refers to a first of month pricing settlement mechanism that we use. We buy this against 2 regional indexes, CIG, which is Colorado Interstate Gas, and Ventura. Those are 2 of the largest regional hubs in the northern United States. About 29% of our total heating season supply is expected to be priced against CIG. Those are largely our Bakken receipts. Those Bakken receipts, we get a very strong discount against those the CIG index. We also have Rocky Mountain receipts. Rocky Mountain receipts would be gas coming up from the Colorado, Wyoming basins. Priced against Ventura, which is physically located in the Iowa area, makes up about 12% of our expected total heating season supply. Again, we have our Bakken receipts can be priced against Ventura, which we get very strong discounts against that index. And just to give you a rough idea of where those discounts land, it can be anywhere from $1 below that index to even $2 below whatever that projected index settlement is. So very good discounts there. Most of those receipts, we purchased that gas off of Northern Border. Northern Border is a very large natural gas transmission line that enters the United States from Canada in northern Montana and snakes across or kitty corner across North Dakota before leaving through South Dakota and into Minnesota. We also have a lot of our natural gas supply has been priced against fixed price deals. Our expectation is 18% of our total supply is going to be against fixed price deals. Similar receipts where we get this gas from Northern Border, again from Rocky Mountain. We also get about 10% of our natural gas supply out of Canada. Those fixed price deals have, many of them have been in place for several years now. So they're really at pre 2021 pricing levels. Some of them less than $2 per MMBTU. And what those do is they really do a great job in keeping down what our weighted average cost of gas gets up to. So they really put a cap on how high our numbers can go. And then about 41% of our planned heating season needs are going to come out of storage. So that was gas that was stored during this past summer. Most of it in that $2.50 to $3.50 range. Again, significantly less than that $5 to $6 range we're talking about now. And those both come out of Baker Storage and Elk Basin Storage, which we discussed a few minutes ago.
Go to the next slide. So what happened in Texas during the storm last year? Prices went through the roof. Electricity went to $9,000 a megawatt. With these price fixes in place, can you assure us that can't happen in Montana?
With these prices, no, we do this fixed pricing as a part of our portfolio year in and year out. And so the next slide will actually help us describe how that, the next two slides will help us describe how that looks and what our risk exposure is to those unpredictable events like we saw in Texas with Winter Storm Uri.
Can I say we have better protections in place in Montana than we do and had in Texas?
Yes, I can say that with confidence. And a lot of it is because, you know, on a normalized basis, about 41% of our total heating season supply is going to come out of storage. When it comes down to what we refer to as a design day, in other words, the coldest day that we plan for, we actually have the capability to withdraw more than 50% of our company-wide need out of storage, which really leaves us less exposed to having to buy into those day markets. There is still some exposure. However, we have the ability with our large amount of storage to mitigate the risk against that.
Question they might ask is there anything I can do or encourage to improve the situation not to happen like it did in Texas? Could we further improve the safety, or do you think we're as safe as we can be?
Well, from a safety perspective, Montana Dakota Utilities, as well as Great Plains, our Minnesota company, we did a really good job from a safety and reliability perspective. The outages during those circumstances were, I don't even know that we had none that I know of off the top of my head during that it was Valentine's Day and President's Day weekend. We had no service issues, no delays with getting gas into our communities. And so we're very proud of the fact that we were able to keep our customers in gas. Whereas in Texas and Oklahoma, there was no gas pressure. Homes were freezing up. And then ultimately there were electric issues as well.
Generac generators are 4 months behind installing generators that run on natural gas throughout Montana. And the dependability in Montana is very, very good. I've never had a natural gas outage, I don't think, in my life. And I'm looking at putting a generator in. So I think the use of natural gas at the home site is going to increase.
Thank you. So this is what I refer to as our supply stack. So this just lays out graphically what we talked about from a total system supply need. The green, which is our base, that is our fixed price supply. The gray or lightish blue color, that's what our exposure to the inside FERC. Again, that's a first of month price at CIG. The yellow is our Ventura first of month. And then the blue is our storage withdrawal. So you see that from month to month, they will vary slightly, with obviously the biggest planned withdrawal from December through February. As we look at what our supply stack looks like on a design day, so this would be those coldest days that we need to plan for. How are we going to ensure that we have enough natural gas hitting our system to keep our customers in gas? And again, the storage withdrawal, that's the top. Okay, so as I mentioned, we have the capability to withdraw from storage more than 50% of our design day requirement. Working our way down on each of those bars, we've got our IFERC vent and our index-based gas, the Ventura and CIG, and then our fixed price gas way at the bottom, or excuse me, the orange bars there. So really what that leaves is what's our day gas exposure. And this is where we are as a utility exposed to the day market on some level. We can't purchase that gas all 151 days during the heating season because we don't know if we're going to have enough demand to take it. And we need some place to go if we purchase that natural gas. So really what we can do and all we can do is mitigate what that exposure is on a daily basis, again, planning. So each year we go in and review our portfolio to look at ways and means that we can reduce that exposure. And we've successfully reduced it a little bit over last year, and we'll continue to work to reduce it some more. So just to kind of wrap things up, I'll bring back this graph that we started with on the long-term outlook. So yes, this winter, as we look at the top of where that red line starts, we do see an elevated natural gas cost for this upcoming heating season. However, the forward markets, which is what that red graph represents, as well as the majority of industry experts and pundits and the likewise, are expecting it to be short-lived at these levels and then return more to that $3 and $4 range in out years. So as we leave the first couple of quarters of 2022, we're hoping to see more normalized natural gas prices. And with that, I'll give you the opportunity to ask any questions.
So if you have a need for more gas from what you currently have, where would you go? You have the storage and you have your production.
Yep. The biggest resource we have at our disposal is the production and our storage.
Mhm.
Having the Bakken right in the middle of our service territory is tremendously beneficial. We have WBI Energy, which is one of the transmission lines going through our service territory. New supplies are getting onto that transmission pipeline. As we speak, they're continually doing more projects that add natural gas producers to that. There's also Northern Border Pipeline, which is a very large natural gas pipeline, like I said, coming in through and going kitty corner across the state of North Dakota, that has a very large amount of supplies at very favorable prices.
Isn't that all subscribed?
It is. However, Montana, Dakota, our transmission capacity to take gas off of that is further north of the major constraint points on Northern Border. So we have the opportunity to get gas off of that might be maybe stuck in the Bakken that people or other entities can't get off. So we're actually very well positioned on northern border to take off supply.
And how much of the gas from the central part of the country, northern part, how much of that goes to export? Or is that just all Permian and
You know, physically speaking, obviously none of it's making its way down. The molecules themselves are not making it down to Louisiana and the Texas hubs and things like that.
Mhm.
I don't have an answer to that question exactly on a tidal basis, how much of that gas is going down. At the end of the day, though, as those LNG exports continue to grow and continue to expand, whether it's our gas flowing down to that area or just being offset, you know, it does have an impact. I will note that generally speaking, most of the LNG export hubs are reaching max capacity.
Mhm.
And so the only thing that can really change is not necessarily more gas coming off at those LNG exports, at least until there's more capital investment in that. But the price will just get higher. It'll become more valuable. So we'll see what that dynamic looks like over the coming years.
Yeah, as soon as I heard that President Trump was exporting natural gas to Eastern Europe as to relieve the pressure from the Russians on them, I realized that supply and demand was going to absolutely show up right here, and I've seen some of the LNG tankers that they're just massive, bigger than aircraft carriers out there, and loaded with all this stuff. And so as that picks up more steam, then that would be produce higher prices, constraints here. It's a little bit far afield, but I wonder if the Nord Stream one into Germany from Russia, if that gets completed, do you have any idea? Is that going to affect domestic demand here?
As far as domestic demand, no. It shouldn't have really any material impact on domestic demand.
I mean, exports from here. Yeah.
It certainly could. The biggest thing is there's going to be some level of price elasticity. And so it's going to come in, and then the dynamics of the market will change slowly over time. And then there will be some ebb and flow in that. So how quickly the market reacts from an LNG export perspective is going to be an interesting thing to watch.
And then just one other question. You talked about showed about the exports to Mexico. Is Mexico doing anything do they have any gas there to develop?
It's really been, the United States has built several transmission pipelines into Mexico over the years. And it's really just serving demand as far as having exploration and production to be had to generate and extract their own natural gas. At this point, I don't know the makeup of what that looks like for the future. Might it turn on where some of the drilling techniques we've utilized in the United States can be employed down there? Not that I know of, but that's not to say that there's not some basins that are ready to be explored. So we'll see.
And one last thing, I think on my calendar Friday, MISO is having a discussion about their temperature forecast for the fall. What you showed on here, is that how up to date is that? Is it, I'm just, it showed for like in this area, you had in the Northwest 2 shades of color right here. So you're saying for Montana, it would be a very mildly higher than average temperature?
Right now, the latest forecast I have, and this presentation is that particular slide is a few days old, but the current forecast that I'm using until I'm informed otherwise is that November is looking to be milder than normal, but there is a good chance of a normal to slightly below normal December through February. What I really look at though, in contrast, is not so much the winter heating season as a whole, but it's really looking out for those individual events that can pop up.
Mhm.
Because they can really skew the number and the data to being colder or warmer than normal really quickly. And they have the biggest or the most dramatic impact to natural gas prices and availability. And so while overall temps are important, we're really watching to hear any forecasts on likelihood of a colder event, what's going on with the polar vortex, how deep into the United States that might come this year. Those are the types of things we're actually watching, probably, if not as much, for probably even more closely than the overall temperature forecast.
And I guess I said before that one last thing, but I do have one more, that you may not be the right person to, but I opposed this at the OMS meeting just the other day, and I asked it of the head of MISO, and I didn't get an answer that I understood.
Okay.
The Biden administration's goal of electrifying basically everything, and how certain states have this, 100% renewables, is that right now we have three energy conduits. We have electrical lines, we have petroleum products, gasoline that powers cars and boats and planes and trains and all that. And then we also have natural gas. The total electrification would mean that all three of those conduits, pipelines or whatever, would all be borne by wires. I don't see how that's possible for that to happen. It just seems like unless we triple the transmission lines across the country, which is at just an enormous cost. What do you see for the future on that? It seems like me that it's absolutely impossible to achieve.
It's impossible to achieve by the end of the Biden administration, certainly. But it'll be a slow graduation, I'm sure. At what speed and at what cost is ultimately going to be a very important question. And I'm looking forward to seeing how that goes.
But do you think it's possible that all of the energy supplied by the other two can be borne by electrical wires?
Not real near term, no. It's going to take some amount of time and certainly some effort. What that is what we'll watch for.
Okay, thank you. I don't see how it's possible at all, but it's too massive. But anyway, go ahead. Thank you.
Thanks, Sean. Next up will be Joseph Geiger, and Director of Generation, and he's going to give some updates on some generation.
All right, good afternoon. So again, Joe Geiger is my name. 2 years roughly in my position as Director of Generation, replaced Alan Welty, if you guys are potentially familiar with Alan. Diving right in, I guess, really, I have got three topics for you. It's going to be our Heskett 4 project in Mandan, North Dakota, our Diamond Willow Repower project, and then just give you an update on the decommissioning efforts at Lewis and Clark Station. So starting off with Heskett 4, just a little background. It's an 88 megawatt simple cycle gas turbine. I've already stated, located in Mandan, North Dakota. In optimal conditions, cold and dry, really, it's capable of over 100 megawatts. It was identified as part of the 2019 IRP least cost resource expansion plan. And there are a number of cost savings that were ultimately able to be achieved through the existing Heskett site in Mandan, specifically the transmission interconnect, the service building. We were able to utilize the emissions netting fuel supply with the gas pipeline that was already in place for our Heskett 3 site. and the fire protection system. At least those are a few of them. So the project's estimated at about $68.4 million so far, tracking along those lines. Next slide here, might be hard to see on the sheet, but from the slide deck or the projector view, really it's a mirror image of the Unit 3 site. The Unit 3 is the lighter grade site, the darker gray being Unit 4. Again, mirroring that. The only real change to this drawing, this is probably one of our first drawings that we put together on the site, is kind of on the left side in the fencing area. That's where the emergency generator sits, and we just decided it was a little bit more cost effective to relocate in a different area. So as far as where we're at with the project to date, we have basically completed all of the permitting. The air permits are done, citing North Dakota ADP, MISO generation replacement. The engineering, the detailed engineering has been initiated. We're continuing to work through that. We plan to award the general contractor first quarter of next year. And the procurement side of things is really what we're after. A lot of contractual things, contracts, execution, things of that nature. We've completed so far, or executed so far, the turbine generator, the exhaust and acoustic package, the generator step-up transformer, then the SIMS, which is the emissions monitoring systems. The remaining pieces there, the gas coalescing filter, aux transformer, medium low voltage electrical equipment, and the emergency generator. Construction is scheduled to begin in March of 2022 or April of 2022, and that coincides with the retirement of the Heskett 1 and Heskett 2 coal-fired facilities. Projected to complete around February 2023, and commercial operation is now pushed to April of 2023. So it's already pushed back with supply chain issues, and roughly 2 months at this point. Where we're the next slide is really just a same general update or overview of the schedule, just more in graphic form. So I'll pause there if there are any questions on the Heskett 4 project.
So with the decision to shut down Lewis and Clark, part of the reasoning for that had to do with the expected cost of natural gas, as I recall. With the increased price and with the expected increase in price over what it was at the time the decision was made, it would seem to me that that might have affected the decision to close Lewis and Clark. The economic viability of keeping it open or providing an alternative.
Commissioner O'Donnell. So in our 2019 and 2021 IRPs, there were some sensitivities that were performed in that, and Darcy will be up later, and I think he would be most appropriate to answer that question.
Thank you.
So I think, yeah, Darcy's going to have a lot of answers for the questions that are probably going to be thought of during my presentation. So I'll do the best to buzz through and we'll get Darcy up here.
Thank you.
Moving on to Diamond Willow Repower Project. It's a the initial project is 30 megawatt wind project. It's in Baker, Montana. Phase 1 of the project, 19.5 megawatt, 13 wind towers, went commercial in 2007. So what we're looking to achieve is qualifying for 10 years of wind production tax credits and at the 80% level. And right now we're looking good. It's looking like we're going to qualify and try to push that project through. $15.4 million price tag on that project, and we're looking to complete that in late 2020. So we're really going to get started on it. We've already started with some of the procurement pieces, and that consists of generators, gearboxes, pan mount transformers, potential for either refurbished or brand new blades, and then ultimately, again, started that now and finish up the procurement in early 2022 and complete in late 2022. That's it for Diamond Willow. And then the Lewis and Clark D&D project, the deconstruction demolition. So as you guys are probably well aware, Lewis and Clark 1 was a 40 megawatt coal-fired power plant in Sydney, Montana. We retired that unit at the end of March 2021. We so far have done the engineering or worked with power engineers on engineering support, and the general contractor has been awarded. That is Brandenburg, and Brandenburg's on site. They've mobilized and they're there currently working on the demolition piece. So as far as the project itself, we broke that into 3 sub-projects: the final outage, continuity of operations, and the D&D efforts. Final outage was performed, Final outage was performed roughly with the majority of our own MDU staff, and that consisted of removing any contaminants, oil, ash, and isolating any electrical in preparation for D&D. The continuity of operations piece is the secondary phase of that project. The general intent of the continuity of operations is to make Lewis and Clark 2, the rice generating unit, standalone. And so, had to pull a lot of the electrical, a lot of the utilities, fire protection loops, and redo some of that work there. And ultimately, the controls piece was probably one of the larger pieces, along with the fire protection upgrades. So we did put freeze protection in order to. We also serve Sydney sugars off of our intake structure. So we did put freeze protection in because we have had some freeze up issues with the Yellowstone River, and in order to keep that channel open, we would discharge warmer water back into the river to flow down and ultimately keep that thawed. And with that not being an option any further, we've chosen to go with kind of an insulated intake structure, and ultimately pouring in some warmer water just into the channel, not directly into the river for environmental purposes. So with that, that's really it for the continuity of operations side. So,
Not so fast. So Sydney Sugars say that maybe they're going to shut down because they can't afford to cure the sugar using anything else but coal. Have you talked to them? Do we have the ability to keep them running? They're going to have to move to natural gas, which they're going to buy from you to cure the sugar. Currently, they use coal. They're concerned the price will be higher and Sydney Sugars will shut down, which sugar beet manufacturing and growing facilities would disappear. What do we know about that?
I don't know a lot about the changeover from coal to natural gas. Obviously, we don't provide the coal, but one thing that we have been able to help them with is provide them with this water, this resource. That was something that we already had done in the past, and we actually were able to provide them at a much reduced cost, I guess, if you will. So that's something that we've been trying to do to help alleviate some of their financial potential struggles that they're potentially encountering. And I don't know their books. I don't know where they sit. But regarding natural gas versus coal, I am not aware of a changeover currently. So that's.
And Commissioner Pinocci, I do know that our employees have talked directly with them, and they've worked together to do the economics of the natural gas and a pipeline over to them. I haven't heard of a status update on that now for quite a while, but I do know that they have talked in the past. I believe my understanding is that it is now in Sydney Sugars Court. We've provided the information that we can. As Joe mentioned, just this summer, we put in the intake structure and secured a new contract with them for their share of that work too. So we've been very encouraged by working with them, and I'm just not sure of the status of converting to natural gas if from coal, if that's going to move forward or not.
As I understand it, to remove the equipment that would cure the sugar from coal and move to natural gas is going to cost millions. And then the concern that natural gas will cost more to cure the sugar than burning coal. We all know that a company can come in and make a special rate. Is it possible that you could match the rate of what they pay for coal to cure the sugar to your natural gas and have that customer have a special fixed rate? Is that a possibility?
So currently, our natural gas is a pure pass-through. So if we pay $2 for gas, we pass that through and the customer pays $2 for gas. Montana, Dakota makes no profit on that. So absent some type of a fixed price contract, if the cost of natural gas, as Sean showed on the graphs there, as that ebbs and flows, that is our mechanism to recover that cost. And again, it's no profit to the company. I guess I don't know that we couldn't do a fixed price contract on the natural gas, but it's not something we currently do. It'd have to be something that we would investigate. We have a lot of very large natural gas customers. I mentioned Bobcat was a new customer. They were on propane before. They happen to be in North Dakota. The economics for them, the natural gas was cheaper than propane. So that made their economics work. I guess we'd have to look and see. And we're certainly open to conversations with Sydney Sugars. As I mentioned, I know we've had conversations with them. So it'd be something that we'd have to figure out how to make it happen.
I'm not sure I had a chance to visit with the chairman about this or some of my new staff here. But we need to understand that Westmoreland tells me because we're shutting down the coal-fired facility to generate electricity in Sydney, that they cannot stand alone and sell coal to Sydney Sugars. Many people don't understand that coal is used to cure sugar. If Westmoreland shuts down, this puts Sydney Sugars in danger, millions of dollars of sugar beet production. I've had a walkthrough with the plant. They ship their sugar really all over the United States. And it would be very difficult to lose the tax base from the coal mine in Savage and Sydney Sugars on top of that. We're talking about a very destructive situation for the tax base, for the schools in Savage, for the schools in Sydney, for the workforce. This is going to have unintended consequences. So if you could help out with a fixed rate to ensure that at least Sydney Sugars could go forward, I think that would be helpful. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, so, the last bullet here is the D&D portion and really where the project's, somewhat in its infancy with the fact that we've just started. We haven't deconstructed or demolished any of the large structures yet. I put a few pictures together here that I can probably skip right to. But the majority of the work has been with asbestos removal and any contaminants, things of that nature. So we're about 90% through that process.
I noticed you had prices on the two projects earlier, but no price on the D&D. What do you estimate that's going to cost?
Unintentional. It was about I think roughly $11 million.
Okay.
The D&D.
Thank you.
Will these costs be passed on to the ratepayer?
Commissioner Pinochi. So if you remember, we were in 2019 and requested a deferred accounting order. And so at this time, we are accumulating those costs in a regulatory asset. And we would be back in front of this commission at the time of a next gas rate case, or electric rate case, I'm sorry. And we would look for resolution to those costs at that time.
There was a company that approached you and wanted to take over the coal fire facility and continue its operation. And I was told that you wouldn't give them a deal. Were you approached by one company or two companies to take over this facility? Keep in mind, I don't produce enough electricity to supply Montana. However, MDU doesn't seem to have a supply problem because you're backed up by the market clear down to Alabama and to Canada, which gives you a good advantage. But why wouldn't you just turn the plant over to someone else and let them try to make it work?
So I believe there were two different entities, if you will, that approached Montana Dakota. And as we discussed more, I do not believe we were the ones who backed out. I believe they backed out. They really, I'm not sure. I think it was maybe more just a fishing trip for them, if you will, to see what we had. Some of the arrangements were if we would continue to buy the power, which we could buy cheaper through MISO. And so the business plans just didn't hold up. And I think one of them wanted to shut the plant down and do something else with the site. And so there were some concerns that we had with the demolition, what happens then. So again, I think at the end of the day, it was not a clear cut, we're going to come in and run the plant and it's going to continue to produce. Keep in mind, the plant is 60 some years old. And if it were economic, we'd still be running it for a while, maybe, but it's served its life. So
I understand that. The ratepayer tells me not so long ago that millions of dollars of upgrades were done to the plant and passed along to the ratepayer. And the ratepayer is asking me if they were just going to get rid of it, why did we do how many millions of dollars of upgrades not that many years ago? How do I answer that question? They claim that they have an updated plant with updated scrubbers that could last, and we meet all of the requirements on air pollution. Why did we go through that expense, pass it to the ratepayer just to shut it down later? They felt that it was going to be open longer than it was. They claim they were told it was going to be open years longer than it is after those upgrades. Do you give the money back that they invested, that cost that was passed to the ratepayer? How do I answer that question?
So Darcy will be up here again. Through our IRP process, those options were studied. And so Darcy can elaborate on that a little bit more. And but at the time we did those environmental, so they were environmental, they weren't optional things that we chose to do. It was either that or shut them down. But Darcy can speak more eloquently on that than I can.
Somebody thought a Canadian company was dismantling everything and it's going to get moved to Canada. Anything about that you know of? Or if this gets tore down, it's going to be scrapped?
As far as the Lewis and Clark facility,
Yes.
So the way the contract was structured with the contractor, they basically have ownership of the materials. So I believe the idea is for them to scrap the majority of the equipment.
So nothing's going to be built in Canada and reused.
Not to the best of my knowledge.
Sure. All right.
If I can just make one clarification, I just thought of something. We talked about the total cost of the decommissioning, and Montana customers have already paid for their share of that. And I didn't think about that when I talked about the deferred accounting order. So none of that will be coming back to Montana customers.
So I can assure them that there'll be no cost of demolition passed or cleanup to the customers. And you won't be before the commission asking for money to increase their power bill to pay for that.
Not for the decommissioning, no.
Okay, thank you.
No additional costs.
Right, they paid all that. Yep.
So lastly, this is a picture of the plant taken roughly a week ago. And I don't know how familiar you are with the actual, view of the facility in itself, but the admin building sits off to the left with the reddish orange stripe up top, and that's where the asbestos abatement was already completed with some of the floor tiles and things of that nature. I've got a stack progression picture because the stack paints were asbestos containing, so we had to remove that. And ultimately, they wrapped the boiler, as you can see in that plastic wrapping, and basically to keep that at negative pressure so that they can start doing the insulation removal, asbestos containing removal, material removal of the boiler structure itself. And so that was quite the effort to get even to this point, which really is, again, not having any of the larger structures removed or pulled down yet. So that's the picture of the plan as it looks today.
What's the estimated time of completion?
Well, the contract, it's kind of up in the air. The contractor has till the end, or basically to the fall of 2022. Original projection was to be done in the spring, and it already looks. So the issue we're running up against is I don't know that they're necessarily 100% used to doing projects in this type of climate. And so obviously we need dust suppression, and dust suppression is very difficult to achieve with blowing water in January, February in Montana. So that's ultimately something that'll probably set us back just a little bit. But again, they have to October, and the initial projection was through roughly April or May, and then ultimately do some of the final grading and seeding in May. But it's probably going to be pushed a few months from that point. So this is just the last slide that I have, just to kind of show you the progression of the stack paint abatement. They used a device called a hydromobile, and basically use these suction cup devices to spray water and pull the paint, asbestos paint, off of the stack and gradually work their way down. So kind of an interesting slide.
Just out of curiosity, what do you do with that stuff? How do you dispose of it?
In the landfills, not local, not on site, yeah, off-site landfill.
Oh.
So that's all I had. Any questions for me specifically with the that I can answer before we get Darcy up here?
So a concern the ratepayer has on these wind turbines is some of them are wearing out, breaking down, and then we're burying them in Wyoming before they're even paid for. Are we looking for, one is, do you feel that's true? Also, why aren't we requiring a warranty on the wind turbine to last long enough to make sure it's paid for itself? And are we doing that? Solar panels were changing color, breaking into pieces, and falling in people's rain gutters before they were paid for. Today, the solar panel can be guaranteed to be 86% efficient after 25 years. That's some serious improvement, and I'm impressed with that. I would like to see the ownership transfer with warranty to the owner who may buy the home after, say, 14 years, so he gets the warranty to extend with the owner of a new home or a new solar panel facility. when you're putting in wind turbines, what guarantee do we have that it's going to last long enough to pay for itself? And is the ratepayer paying the cost to bury these things in Wyoming? What can you tell me about that?
Well, not a lot, to be honest with you. One of the things that we are looking at is a refurbishment versus maybe a replacement for these wind tower blades for this specific upgrade that we're talking about here with Diamond Willow Phase 1. So that's one thing that we're at least contemplating. It ultimately it'll be based on some of the inspection work that happens and some of the things of that nature. So now regarding guarantees, I would have to look at the contracts to see how they're structured. I haven't seen those. At least they haven't come across my desk, and it's something that I probably should look into. But I'm not 100% sure on how any of that is structured at this point. Now, one thing I can speak to is that there are a number of items that we would have to replace or refurbish at this point in time before the end of 2022, whether we were going after or enticing with these PTCs either way. So whether we were able to qualify for those PTCs, we would still have to do a large majority of the work. It was timely that this kind of worked in our favor from that perspective.
And Commissioner, I think Joe would agree. We don't have any wind turbines that we buried in Wyoming. We have 3 wind farms, Thunder Spirit, which is down around Hettinger in North Dakota, Cedar Hills, which is down by Rain, and then the Diamond Willow by Baker, Montana. And all of the turbines that we put up, the Diamond Willow being the first, are still up and currently running. And we haven't refurbished any of them up to this point. You have your standard maintenance or items that fail, but in terms of have we done any repower or sent them to Wyoming to be buried, that is currently not the case with Montana, Dakota specifically.
The ratepayers in Sydney are pretty proud that their power plant, they feel, is still in good working order, even though it's shutting down. And they don't believe that any wind turbine is going to last as long as the turbine did at the coal fire facility. I don't think it will either. Sooner or later, these wind turbines will have to come down. What's the plan to get rid of them? I understand a landfill won't take them. I understand a landfill won't take them in Montana. Am I correct? And where are we going to take them? And will you come to this commission and ask the ratepayer to start disposing of these wind turbines that I understand a landfill won't accept? What is the cost going to be on that? Perhaps when you go to buy them, you could tell the manufacturer that they have to take them back. I'm not sure what deal could be made, but I'm trying to uncover what truth is to this. I've seen the pictures of where they're burying them, and the landfills are having a problem taking them. Are we planning for that? Are we planning to ask the ratepayers to pay for it when the time comes? What are your thoughts?
I guess I don't know on the disposal where old windmills go, I guess. I don't know the answer to that. In terms of this particular refurbishment that Joe has talked about, that will be in our next electric rate case. And we've run some models on that. And because we're able to qualify for the 80% production tax credit, that actually ends up to be no incremental cost to the ratepayer. So in that particular case, it'll be in the case, our rate case, I should say, but in terms of will this largely impact the rates customers pay, the answer would be no. In terms of decommissioning, we do currently have in rates decommissioning for the wind turbines. And there's decommissioning standards in North Dakota that you have to, in the event that there's a decommissioning of one of the turbines, there are certain standards you have to meet. Right off the top of my head, I don't know if there's any legal requirements in Montana, but I would assume there are requirements similar. But in terms of how long are they going to last? So the life that we have applied to our wind turbines is 25 years. And we are not at 25 years on any of them yet. We're probably about 15.
Yeah, it will be 15.
So, our experience is maybe somewhat less than some of the other wind farms out there.
How long before a turbine's paid for it? 10?
I guess that's from a customer perspective, we put in a life of 25 years. So theoretically, we put in a wind turbine and the customers pay for that over 25 years.
Thank you.
If there are no other questions for Joe, we can get him off the hot seat here. And Darcy had probably a shorter presentation than he's going to have. So, but he's always ready. So I never worry about Darcy.
Thank you, Travis. Good morning. Good afternoon, Commissioners. I'm Darcy Nigam, Director of Electric System Operations and Planning. Maybe one other quick comment I would make, at least on the wind projects. In the case of Thunder Spirit, which is our largest, we did firm all of the O&M maintenance costs, at least with that project, through a contract we had with the turbine supplier. So at least from the standpoint of anything that needs to get replaced, anything broken down, all that is covered, at least when we negotiated that agreement with them. So in a sense, it ends up being a bumper to bumper warranty that we're paying for over the life of that. The other one is it deals with Cedar Hills and also the Diamond Willow. We also had included additional CapEx in our modeling for those projects that were part of our levelized cost. So when we're replacing those with the production tax credits paying for them, it actually is a savings to customers as well. And so we had several $1 million per year for each of those projects for the gearbox replacements, blade replacements, whatever might be necessary. So just wanted to add that too. What I want to talk about was a MISO topic. And Commissioner O'Donnell may be familiar with this as far as MISO's long-range transmission plan. And so it's one of the larger, longer looking activities that MISO is taking. And what they're trying to do is take a look at what is needed for the electric grid to be able to support, one, the resource change that's occurring amongst its members, which includes 15 states and one Canadian province. If commissioners are not familiar with where MISO is situated, Eastern Montana, our service territory, is the westernmost edge of Montana, of MISO, and it stretches all the way over to Michigan and then down to the state of Louisiana, and then also includes what would be Manitoba from a Canadian province. And so in that, MISO was looking at, not in a short range study, but in a long range study, what is needed as far as for the grid to meet, one, all of the state goals and the integrated resource plans that the utilities have published at this point inside of its membership, and also looking at all the state goals and objectives that they have for renewable standards going forward, and trying to do studies on what is needed for the electric grid for this evolution that we end up seeing across the nation as far as the changing of the generation fleet to something that is more on the carbon neutral side, at least of a generation technology. In that, as MISO is doing that, there are 3 futures that are part also of their annual MISO Transmission Expansion Plan, or MTEP, futures 1, 2, and 3. What's currently being studied now as part of the long range transmission plan is strictly in future 1, which is just meeting what's in companies' integrated resource plans and state goals and objectives, which would get about a 40% carbon reduction from where we were in the 2005 baseline. Futures 2 and 3, which will come in their next sets of studies over the next few years, will get to a 60 and 80% reduction in carbons from 2005 standards. It also does look at some of the additional electrification that would be required, also potentially from the transportation sector, and also as far as from natural gas usage as well. It does make up a part of the additional growth that's a part of futures 2 and 3. So this plan as it sits is taking a look at what's needed for the high voltage transmission system. Two graphs are shown here that are a part of their indicative roadmaps that they came out with earlier this year. These were back in June of 2021. The colors indicate different voltage level, high voltage transmission lines. Red is 345 kV. The gold color is 500 kV and the green is 765 kV. And then you end up with the purple that are DC transmission lines. So just to meet what's anticipated in the future ones, so what's in companies' integrated resource plans and what states have for goals and objectives, we see a transmission build out similar to the graph on the left. To meet the 60 and 80% reductions, we're seeing a build out that's what we would have on the right-hand side of this display. Currently, they're looking for the first set of projects, which will be a subset of future one, to come up before the MISO Board of Directors, probably the end of Q1 of 2022 for approval. In that, it probably would be everything is just being contained in the northern part of MISO, nothing in the south this time. In that, the dollar value, which is projected for a future one build out, could be up to about $30 billion for transmission. And futures 1, 2, and 3, the totals for that could be up to about $100 billion that they could end up seeing for a transmission build out to meet this. One of the other hot topics that goes along with not only the studying of what's needed for transmission is also looking at how is it paid for. And so what's currently talked about is using a cost allocation that was developed for MISO's multi-value project, a cost allocation that was a part of a 2012 portfolio of projects that was approved. I think all but one of those 16 projects is in service. That uses a postage stamp based on usage based to all customers that would be in MISO. One of the changes they're looking at for the long range transmission plan is to have a postage stamp cost allocation for the northern part of MISO, central part, and also a separate one for the southern part.
Darcy, could you explain what you mean by postage stamp?
So the postage stamp would end up being, it would be charged the same rate to all units of electricity that end up being sold in the MISO market. So it would have $1 per megawatt hour basis for that. So the current postage stamp for the multi-value projects currently in service in 2022 is expected to be $1.65 for every megawatt hour to pay for those. And so all load pays the same rate. And that's based upon the annual transmission revenue requirement for those projects that are calculated every year. One of the things is we're looking at doing in the last bullet on this slide of this large build out. One of the things when MDU is a MISO member, the other RTO that is also a part of our area is Southwest Power Pool. So I think they've been here to make presentations as well to this commission. One of the things that we're evaluating is some of our relationships with MISO Transmission Service and Southwest Power Pool Transmission Service that we take to see if the current arrangements we have are in the best interest of our customers. So today we take MISO Transmission Service for all of our load. And then about the western 2/3 of our load, we also have to take Southwest Transmission Service from Southwest Power Pool because of transmission that we need from Western Area Power Administration and Basin Electric. So we have a little bit of two tariffs we pay for part of our load, and the other part of the system only pays just a single tariff. So we're going to do an evaluation based upon some of these costs and the impacts to see what's the best long-term arrangement for our customers. And that's what I had prepared, at least for the slides that I had here. I had wrote down some questions, but certainly commissioners, if you want to ask them again.
So the new high efficiency power lines from 3M or CTC Global will cut line loss by 1/3. We can also double capacity with the same weight line. This would help pay for the lines much quicker. They'd get a payback. Is there talk about replacing these new lines with the high efficiency lines?
So it's one of the considerations is taking a look at using existing right-of-ways and structures. You know, the first thing that ends up coming out is what's needed from a delivery perspective and at least the delivery quantities, and then it would go back to the project studies to figure out what will be built. So certainly some of those new technologies are very feasible in some of these areas where it's hard to get, you know, the right-of-ways to build, you know, a project. And if you could use an existing line or existing right-of-ways, they may be cheaper.
Northwest Energy is replacing a 100-year-old line in Monarch. we just did a press release. The savings on that one line alone will be 440,000 a year in line loss. If you were to do a project like this, it could be $1 billion. So I sure want you to look into that. And I know that, you know, there's probably a board of directors. I'm sure they're looking at it, but I sure encourage you. Thank you.
So certainly when they look at the reasons for doing this, one, it has an economic benefit, you know, as it does deal with, you've mentioned losses. The other ones end up being planning reserve margins as far as needed, how we meet peak generation requirements. Others end up being how do we minimize congestion that we end up seeing across this large service territory or transmission area, which has an economic savings to customers as well. And certainly there's a reliability benefit associated with this. So there's certainly a number of different elements that are being looked at to provide a cost justification for this portfolio.
The new high performance power line cuts sag to almost nothing because of the new carbon core. And sag is a huge problem with fire mitigation because once those lines sag, the wind can then cause them to touch. So if we can cut down the amount of fires, say by half, and increase ice load by double. But I think more importantly, by increasing the voltage in the line, doubling capacity without modifying the structure, we get out of the permitting process. They're trying to teach me that permitting for new structures is very expensive and tough. If we can double the capacity of the power line and keep the existing structure, we get out of the permitting process and replace the lines under maintenance. That's what 3M and CTC Global is trying to get me to convey to the whole industry. Thank you.
I'm going to shift. Darcy, I'm going to shift the burden to you.
Okay,
You said you had written down some answers to
I did.
previous questions. Would you run through those, please?
sure. I can do that. One of the things, maybe I'll just start at the top, is we talk about some of the price impacts or mitigations that we've seen maybe with higher natural gas prices, at least on supply of electricity for our customers. You know, I would say that's largely mitigated. One, at least on our resource plans and models, we don't depend on those resources to dispatch except on peak times. So our average run times in the models is less than 1% that we have for our gas turbines. The other ones I would end up pointing out is at least this year we did enter into or started a longer term power purchase agreement with one of our neighbors in North Dakota to buy an amount of electricity we normally otherwise would have received at a minimum load from the Lewis and Clark station and next year Heskett 1 and 2. And those are significantly below what current market costs are today, bringing costs to our customers, and will be at least through that contract runs through May of 2025. And so we found ways to minimize at least exposures on natural gas and market purchases associated with the plant closures, which are in addition to the savings we had in our last integrated resource plan. And those are flowing through our fuel cost adjustment today, which I think is largely on par with what we've seen probably in the last few years. So where others have had larger spikes, at least in cost of electricity to their customers, we've been able to manage that. And it really has been, I would say, very little adjustment seen to customers. The other one, you know, talking about Commissioner O'Donnell, I think I mentioned in the long range transmission plan, you know, how do we continue to find ways to ship all these other industries through the wires that we end up having? That I think you asked of the OMS meeting, Organization of MISO States. A lot of that is in this long range transmission plan. And at least taking a look at what's needed not only for the electric system changes, but also through some of the other electrification changes that are being seen across the country. And so that's really the avenue driver, at least in eastern Montana and in MISO, is through that planning process. One of the other ones that was talked about was, I think, on Lewis and Clark. One of the things I would say when we talked about the plant upgrades that we did on the pollution control equipment, you know, if we would not have done those upgrades, we would have had to shut the plant down in 2015. And so we basically got another 5 to 6 year life out of that plant by doing those environmental upgrades that we did for the mercury and air toxic standard requirements that were out there. In that was a part of our 2011-2013 integrated resource plan. When we justified spending those dollars, we had looked at running the plant on a minimum of a 5-year basis, at least for a payback. And so we have met that, at least the 5 years we got out of running the units for that additional period of time. And so from a standpoint, was it economic for customers? Yes, it was. You know, kind of the what changed, certainly it's everything in the industry. You know, as far as where we end up at gas prices have changed, electric prices have changed, and the overall competitiveness of those resources compared to other alternatives changed. And so that was really, you know, one of the larger drivers why the shutdown happened, which we documented in our 2019 integrated resource plan.
Could I comment a little bit here? Yes, I agree that the plant would have had to close down by not meeting the match requirements. And you got 5 or 6 more years out of the plant. But the president of your company basically promised that the reason that was seen to be a prudent expenditure was because it would keep the plant open until, and I'm quoting, at least 2025. And it seems to me that shutting it down in 2021 rendered that expenditure to be imprudent at the time. How would you comment on that?
And so part of that, I think, is in our resource plan that we put together for 2019. You know, we went through and documented the competitiveness as those plants stood in 2019 when we did the resource plan, and showed how there were other alternatives that were cheaper. And at least through the retirement and replacement scenario, we're saving the customers money that they otherwise would have to be spending if we would have kept the units, you know, in operation. And so I think we justified at least the closure through the analysis we did as part of that resource plan.
Yeah, and Commissioner O'Donnell, you know, one thing that I would just point out, you know, Darcy said a lot of things have changed since the decision was made, actually back in probably 2013 IRP. So like Darcy said, the industry, MISO, if you look back at our last rate case, which was filed in 2018, in there we had a base cost of fuel and purchase power. We're right at 2.5 cents a kWh. If I look at what we're filing this year, I think last month we were under 2 cents. And I think this month we're right at 2 cents. So what has changed? The cost of coal has gone up. The cost of running that facility has gone up. And really, MISO market prices are driving it down. Darcy mentioned, you know, what are we seeing for market prices? They're pretty consistent, or maybe even below what they were several years ago. So I think a decision is made at that time. And I think the remark was made more that this should get us the ability to run through that time frame. But when it no longer makes sense, and like Darcy pointed out, the IRP is a constantly evolving process, and we looked at it. It no longer made sense. We ran the metrics on it, and it's cheaper for the customers. And in our analysis in the IRP, we showed that was about a $20 million annual savings to our integrated system customers. That would include North and South Dakota. The other thing that I would point out is when the plant did close on April 1st, we started passing back the savings through the fuel for Lewis and Clark. We're able to purchase that power cheaper than we were able to generate it. So the customer is already seeing, that's what I mentioned in the last case, our fuel and purchase power is 2.5 cents, now it's 2. Well, part of that is because we're getting cheaper power through MISO than through generating it.
So a question I have for you is, if our electricity is cheaper now than it was, why did you ask for a rate increase and it was voted on and you got it here? I didn't vote for that, by the way, because I find it hard to understand where you tell us that we have to close the plant because we can get electricity cheaper, while you came to this commission and asked for a rate increase. How do I explain that to the customer?
So the disconnect that you're having is the fuel and purchase power is a direct pass through, similar to the natural gas that I talked about. So on the natural gas side, if we pay $2, we charge the customer $2 for that same decatherm of gas. There's no markup. We're not making any money on that. So, and fuel is the same. If we generate it, our coal cost goes in there, our purchase power goes in there. And again, if it's 2 cents, we charge the customer 2 cents. So the rate increase is just a whole different animal. That is, what are we doing for transmission? I know we've done a lot of work down in the Baker area on transmission. What are we doing for distribution? What are we doing for production assets? That's what we come in for in a rate case. So I think the customer, I don't think they really care. I think they look in the corner and see that my bill is $81 and that's what they see. Now that's a combination of the electricity that they're using as well as any distribution charge that we have. When we went in for a rate increase, it was because of the O&M, incremental O&M. You know, we need to maintain employees, retain them, train them. So those costs continue to go up. Like I say, we've done a lot of work on transmission. So it's things other than fuel that we're coming in for. Does that answer the question?
Well, I try to answer it that way, but they're very confused when they say natural gas prices are the lowest we've ever seen in the country's history. And then we asked for a natural gas increase and said we had to have more money. It's the ratepayers, there's a certain amount of distrust. Rates went up across the state, not just with MDU, but all over.
Yeah.
And it's going up all the way to California. Yet they tell us the price of electricity is cheaper now than it was. My retired people on a fixed income are asking me to do something because they don't get an increase on their benefit for retirement. Some do, some don't. And it's not catching up with the increase that we're going to see now with food prices and energy prices. Would you agree that energy prices are going to go up in the next few months?
I guess from where they are today for the next few months, I'm not sure I would say they're going to go up dramatically. Are they higher than they were? Absolutely.
Then how can we say that things are cheaper? I'm just trying to explain the frustration my ratepayers have when they hear prices are cheaper. Now we close the plant because we can get it cheaper. Why ask for the rate increase? You close the plant, you should give us a rate decrease. That's their thinking. Now, if we're closing the plant because we can get cheaper prices, we have to see a decrease in price. But that's not what is happening, sir. The prices went up. So it's very confusing to listen to. We have to close the plant because we can get our electricity cheaper while you ask for a rate increase and you're still closing the plant. And now Sydney Sugars is at risk. Savage Coal Mine is at risk. The town of Sydney is going to be faced with a catastrophic problem with how they're going to pay taxes, while at the same time the rates went up. As they were told, we're closing the plant because we can get cheaper electricity. It just doesn't make sense. That's their point of view. And I'm just trying to explain that.
Yeah. And on electric prices, they have been stable for Montana, Dakota. The natural gas price is going up for our gas customers. So that, again, I think we're up, I think Sean had about 62% for the cost of gas this year versus last year.
Probably because we're generating electricity with natural gas.
So
I think the last comment I would finish with too, I know there was a question around because of the changes in natural gas prices, did that impact our outcome that we had, at least in the 2019 integrated resource plan, that talked about shutting down the plants and replacing them. And I would say no, because when we did that analysis and study, we looked at different sensitivities that included higher electric costs and natural gas prices. And in that, all of those scenarios that we studied all showed that the replacing the plant, shutting them down, replacing was the cheapest option. And I think a lot of that is still seen through how we look at the fuel cost adjustment today. how customers are seeing the savings of that. Even if natural gas prices are higher, we're still seeing those savings on the electric side.
Additional questions from my colleagues? Not, thank you, gentlemen, for a very, very informative presentation. This was,
We have one topic left.
oh, I'm sorry.
I think
Cybersecurity.
I think we're running long.
We are running long by 19 minutes, but we'll accommodate.
If you don't mind, Dyke Bay's cybersecurity. And I'll turn it over.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. I'll try to go as quickly as I can. It's welcome this afternoon. I'm glad to be back in my home state of Montana. So cybersecurity. Just a real quick background of our governance at MDU and cybersecurity. It's really built into our culture in MDU. We're fortunate enough to have our leadership filter that all the way down to the employees. It's built into their appraisal process for every employee. So top down part of our culture. The CIO reports directly to our CEO with a seat at the and a voice at the executive level. So that really helps us out from a security standpoint. In 2012, we formed the Cyber Risk Oversight Committee, and it was approved by our board of directors in 2014. It's chaired by our CIO, and it has representatives from all departments throughout all of our business units, including financial, governments, regulatory, legal, auditing, including both of our IT environments. So they review all of our technology, our major technology changes in the environment. They accept and vote on risk acceptance for our company. They take an active role in our incident response plan, and they provide quarterly updates to our board of directors, right to our audit committee. Some cybersecurity affecting MDU and Montana that you've probably seen in the news. Just real quick, 4 bullets here. A drastic increase in supply chain hacks. And again, ask any questions if I'll try to, any acronyms I use, things like that. But if you want more information on any one of these, I'm willing to give a little bit more of what I can. Colonial Pipeline ransomware incident we're all aware of on the eastern side. 2011 to 2013, the Chinese gas pipeline intrusion campaign. That was a direct 23 pipelines were targeted, 13 were confirmed compromises. It was a direct task to get in there and destroy and disrupt natural gas pipelines. Massive increase in zero-day exploits. What's that mean? What a zero-day exploit is we may get our updates for our antivirus at home or different things and things that patch our system. Those are known exploits, things that are happening out there. Zero-day exploits are those exploits that are really, there is no fix for it yet. It's out there in the wild. People are taking advantage of it, and there's really no way to fix it. You can help mitigate it, kind of decrease your chances of that, but that's why they're called zero-day exploits. The massive increase over the last several years, we've averaged roughly 22 a year in zero-day exploits nationwide, worldwide. And we're up to 64 already. We're going to hit 64 by the end of year. So that's a major increase there, just trying to minimize that zero-day exploit. Some of the government responses to this uptick, the 100-day sprint that was released back in April, I believe. It's the increased visibility, detection, and response for the industrial control systems of electric utilities. Where that's going is really to enhance and mitigate or help get more information out there and more faster response to kind of get, if we do have an incident, get the response back to the government and kind of correlate information from all systems. The TSA security directive, that calls for changes throughout our business information technology networks and operational technology environments with very aggressive deadlines. And real quick, for an IT business network, what you'll hear me say IT a lot and OT. IT is really our financial systems, our corporate backbone kind of systems. The OT side of that is really our operational technology. So critical infrastructure, our systems in the backbone that's kind of really running the back end system. We're working with the AGA and the EIA on monitoring the federal proposed bills. You'll see some bills coming out as far as ransomware regulation of how much ransomware, if we're allowed to pay, things like that. A lot of more notification alerting in a certain amount of hours, a certain amount of days you have to report any kind of incidents you have. So we're monitoring those very closely. Some of our recent updates in our program, and the next slide will kind of go into what we're doing next. Recent updates in our program, we've implemented next-gen firewalls and endpoint protection. What that is really driving towards is the combined logging, threat protection, detection, and automation. What that really means is before we've had firewalls throughout our system, getting out on the internet, coming in, protect us from the inside. You may have separate type of systems on your endpoint devices sitting on your desk, things like that. We now have firewalls that they learn from how your activity is, along with your endpoint systems, and all those logs go into the same what we call a data lake, the same central repository that we can correlate to kind of see activity that we have a lot more visibility into now. We implemented an offline recovery system, ransomware mitigation. What that entails is really our backup system that we're backing up all of our servers and systems that run our corporation. We also replicate that to another facility for a disaster recovery standpoint. But then we take that a step further for our critical infrastructure and systems and our data. We replicate that off to an offline system that's really not connected to our network so that's our ransomware mitigation. If something happens, we can fall back to that system. We implemented multi-factor authentication for all of our remote access, administrative access, and operational technology access. A lot of us, I'm sure, are all familiar with doing it on our banks nowadays. You get the text message, you get the alert where you can push the button to accept it, make sure that's who you are. We took a large and really made sure all of our access coming in from the outside required multi-factor authentication. That includes internally for our administrative access and any kind of what we call a jump box. More or less, you have a system that allows you to get into our operational technology access. Those also have to have multi-factor authentication. Current projects in our program going forward, physical, logical separation between our operational technology systems and our IT systems. So what that's calling for is more kind of similar to Colonial Pipeline. We're going one step further to make sure those operational technologies can operate on their own if there is a system or issue with our business network. They should not be dependent on each other to run. So we're taking that to allow more separation, to allow them to work independently. Zero trust methodology in the application allow listing. What that's referring to is in reference, you may log into your system in the morning and you have access throughout the day to different systems. You might be getting onto your payroll. You may be getting onto your email system, things like that. Zero trust is really taking that a step further where you don't, even though you logged in on your system, on your endpoint, you're not automatically entrusted to get to every other system throughout the corporation. You have to authenticate to each one, not so much a password, but certificates, things like that we do on the back end that also make sure you are who you say you are. And along with that, part of the zero trust methodology is the application allow listing. So when you may get a piece of software that you purchased or downloaded and you would go and install it on your systems, you can no longer do that as a end user at MDU. You have to get that approved. We take a look at their vendor. We do some certifications for them and make sure once we say that it's allowed, then employees can install it. So we're making sure we take that step to make sure and look at the vendors. Are they reputable? Are we going to trust them? Things like that before it gets installed. The multi-factor authentication on all workstations, that's taken our MFA one step further. So like in the previous slide, what we did before was remote access. Now we're doing it internally to every time you log onto your system, you're going to have to MFA of some sort to get onto your workstation. The expedited vulnerability management requirements, timeline and severity. What I'm referring to there is really Before we would really patch and strive to get our criticals and our high security vulnerabilities patched as soon as possible and get out in the, now we're taking that to really any security patches getting installed, lows, mediums, highs, and criticals in a timely fashion. And like I mentioned before, the 0-day exploits, there may not be a patch for those, but we're taking mitigations to protect ourselves until the patch is available. So along with that, security comes with a price. All technology has a cost, but it's also has a soft cost to operate and maintain it, along going with our keeping our payroll and our systems and those kind of things, our operating O&M costs to maintain those. Industry, as you probably have noticed, a lot of your service that you're maybe buying for your businesses or even at your home PCs are going to subscription-based cloud services. Previous model allowed for us to purchase this technology. We used it on premise and we utilized it over years, allowed us to capitalize that asset. Now you can see we're going to, vendors are just forcing us to move to more of a annual subscription and cloud hosting. And that really loses a lot of our control of those costs. It puts it in their hands and moves us to an O&M type cost. Along with additional costs that external pen test. A pen test is where you're really hiring a company to really try to hack into your system. Tell us what's wrong, see what you're seeing. So we're increasing requirements for external pen tests, assessments. A VADR is a validated architectural design review. So we're getting requirements to have reviews come in and look at our systems. OT inventory and monitoring systems, we're getting required to do a lot more monitoring and inventory of all of our operational technology. And again, the vendor and supply management, I kind of referenced a few times, is really an increase in requirements on our end and on the vendor side, where we're having to do questionnaires, certifications, and assessments, and really those all add cost to it. And I believe there's an article in the National Conference of State Legislatures that calls 32% for utilities in their cyber budgets. We've been fortunate enough to not to see quite that high of a increase. I think we had a 12% this last year, but if all the federal mandates go into effect, we're looking at least a double amount in our cyber budget coming up. So it will hit us, but probably not as quite as that 32% that they reference. But I went through that as quickly as I can, but I'm open for some questions.
So if you and I were to get with the state legislation and say, here's a bill that would help fight this problem, can you think of what we would ask for? I have two guys running for Congress right now, Rosendale, Olszewski, both of them asking me, what can we do in Washington on energy? What could we change to help you fight this battle? What bill could be introduced on a state level and a federal level that I can stand right next to you and say, pass this bill? What do you have for us for an answer to that? Is there an answer to that?
Well, as far as one of the items you asked me for, I think there's quite a few that we could probably work on together, but the standardization and class or standardization from a vendor standpoint to make sure we're coding, make sure we're putting in that the mitigation controls to make sure they have checks and balances. Like I mentioned earlier, the supply chain hacks, how that's happening is we're purchasing, just like you purchase your house for software and items, we're purchasing stuff from a trusted vendor that we trust. And we go to them to get updates. What the nation states and actors are and malicious actors are doing, of course, they're going into those, and they're not coming directly at us. They're going into the vendor that we trust to get our updates from. So it's not putting any blame on them either, because we're all running the same type of systems. But legislature that will really hold them accountable and make sure we give them the funding to help get more coding checks in there, make sure they get their checks and balances in there. Any of that would absolutely help. Agreed.
I was surprised at something. You said current projects, physical and logical separation of OT from IT. I should figure from everything that I've seen is that your IT systems is immensely more vulnerable to intrusion than OT systems, and that they should have been separated. Like item number one is to separate them. So it's you're still working on that?
Yeah.
I'm not saying that in
clarify
a
your-
challenging way.
No, no,
I'm
you're-
terribly
It's
surprised
a
at
good
that.
clarification question there. Absolutely. Our OT systems have been, critical systems have always have been separated. And Darcy oversees the major one for the electrical side, and we do yearly tests for that. What this is calling for is a one step further to make sure there's no, with that one, we for sure are testing that. But let's say, like what happened to Colonial, they didn't necessarily have, they could operate their pipeline. They
Mhm.
didn't necessarily have a problem, and they took that down as a precaution.
Mhm.
More from my understanding is from a billing standpoint, their billing system was connected to that. So they wanted to make sure it didn't filtrate into that. And then they kept their billing system down for a longer period of time because of that. So we're taking, this is calling for, to make sure we have additional precautions. There's no IT or OT reliance on each other to send out bills, things like that. We can continue to operate as needed.
And one of the lessons from the Ukraine experience was the ability to adjust these switches manually. Is there any type of that type of redundant system within MDU system?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll speak more on that just because it's quick in my mind. I work also for the other business units, and we sat down with our gas side of the business and ran through that tabletop exactly what they do in an event
Mhm.
of running those manual systems independently of the IT system. So yeah, absolutely there is.
Thank you.
If there are no other questions for Dyke, I did have a slide for myself, and we kind of talked about it, where we plan to file an electric rate case in the fourth quarter of 2022. And I've got some bullets on there, the Heskett 4 turbine, the continued investment in the transmission assets. We are seeing, well, Dyke just talked about software costs are going up. Safety and reliability is our number one concern. And, in our last natural gas case, it was a big focus on safety. And we had an example where we used those dollars in Hinsdale. There was a safety concern with the gas system there. We spent, I believe it was less than 10 days. We had all the customers and the entire distribution system replaced. So there is a growing push on O&M and other items. I mentioned too, stagnant load growth in Montana. We really haven't reached back to the pre-pandemic levels. So our sales are lower than what they were in our last case. And so in the context of Lewis and Clark, I mentioned earlier that that would be addressed in the next case, and we'll have Heskett units 1 and 2 in there as well. With that, I would just like to express my sincere appreciation for going way over our scheduled hour and a half. I appreciate you guys listening, and I'm available if you have any other questions, but if not, I just want to say thank you.
I did have a question. You mentioned about the Hinsdale. What about the ongoing program of replacing aging gas lines? How's that program going? Is that, as I understand, it was a 5-year program? Is that
So we plan for 5 years at a time,
okay? Yeah.
but it's a multi-year program.
Mhm.
So it'll extend past 5 years. So if you go back a rate case or so, we were kind of in its infancy, and we were kind of doing projects, a little one here and a little one there. We've got now a dedicated manager to that, and he's doing all of our states, and they're doing multi-year contracts when they can. They're staying in the different locations longer so that they can maximize the dollars. So the program, I think, is going very well, and we're making progress. Unfortunately, some of this pipe is nearing 100 years old,
Mhm.
and the technology has changed, but the progress on the program, I think, is going well. And but that that's an example of what drives a rate case for us. We put in, $5 to $6 to $8 million a year in pipeline replacements. Again, safety and reliability, those are the cornerstones that we have to stand on. And it's not cheap. But we're doing the best so that we get the biggest bang for our dollar on those programs. So.
Well, and if somebody could, I'd like to get an update on that in terms of what the integrity of the system is and what progress has been made on the replacement of the vulnerable areas, what the pre-1984 Alkyl A lines that were prematurely compromised, all that type of stuff, I'd like to know about that.
Yep, and we are still in the process of studying the Aldelay pipe. And my understanding is that as it stands today, the pipe is probably in better shape than what we had anticipated.
Oh,
The climate that we live in has been better suited for that than some other national locations. So, but we do have, what we've been focused on is the early vintage steel. And a lot of that is because of the connections on that. And just the technology that was used at the time. But we certainly can circle that up and get an update on that.
yeah, because it was about 27 years ago, I guess, my earlier house was built. And there was I had told them that I wanted a gas for the oven, the kitchen, but they put electricity in. And then when I brought it to their attention, they ran a separate pipe from the meter, and part of it was underground. And then just a few years later, it was leaking, and the MDU fellow who came out because we detected a smell. He said that the coating on the pipe had corroded, so that's what caused that whole thing. So that's different from that was an additional line that was added onto it, not something you have ordinarily underground, whatever. But yeah, so thank you.
You're welcome.
The commission, all of us agreed to vote on the money used to upgrade lines. I think importantly, looking at what happened in Bozeman with Northwestern Energy, that was a case where updates needed to be done there, and I sure didn't want to see that happen again in Montana. And then just a few days later, Hinsdale had a failure. The timing for us between both MDU and this commission was really perfect. And it was a unanimous decision, which was good to see. So that was a good example of us working together, and the timing was dead on for Hinsdale. But we certainly just look at the history with what happened in Bozeman, and now everybody's a lot more careful. So we're taking that very serious.
Did we get a final report on exactly what happened in Hinsdale, the causes, and we got the report of what you did. What about all the causes? It was like the whole town just developed leaks all at one time.
So I did have a meeting with Pat Darris,
Mhm.
who is our VP of Engineering and Operations, and Garrett Singer just a day or two ago. And from what I understand, they have determined that it was not, so it wasn't that we had anything wrong on our system, but they're looking into what could have caused this issue. So they're still investigating, and they're working very careful, or very closely, I should say, with the state of Montana and the inspection personnel on that. So Pat was quite adamant. He said he's not satisfied with where they're at on that yet. So the investigation, it seems like it's been a long time, but they're still looking into exactly what caused that. So we're hoping to have that before not too long, but it is still in process. So
Thank you.
All right. I won't jump the gun this time. So thank you. to MDU for your presentation today. As I was noting earlier, it is been extremely informative. I appreciate your time, appreciate your coming to the commission. I would say that I'm in the camp of having in-person meetings as opposed to Zoom. I think they're far more productive, frankly. So thank you for your time and the information you provided today.